Okay, so now let's talk about congruent angles. So if two angles have the same measure, then they're said to be congruent. Okay, so very similar to you have congruent segments, you have congruent angles. So same measure, they are congruent. So if you're talking about the measurements, the actual numbers, the degree numbers, we would say the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle B. But if we're talking about the angles themselves, the objects, then we would say angle A is congruent to angle B. Again, refresher on that congruent symbol, it's just an equal sign with a squiggle on top. So over here, you see that it says the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle B. That's the measurements. And then angle A is congruent to angle B. That's the objects themselves. Try your best to keep this straight. When we do these things called proofs, right, we'll usually talk about the objects, but in your algebra problems, you might use the measurements. Notice in the picture here, we use arcs to represent congruent angles. So this angle A has one red arc. This angle B has one red arc. They are congruent. If angle A were to have two arcs, then angle B would have to have two arcs to be congruent. And if angle A had three arcs, then angle B would have to have three arcs. Do your best to try to make them arcs. They're not straight lines. They're kind of hard to write though. All right, so let's take a timeout from Google Slides and let's go into Desmos Geometry and let's draw two congruent angles. Okay. All right, so I'm going to come here to Desmos Geometry. I'm going to grab the ray tool and create two angles. So here's one. They're going to be acute angles. And here's the second one. Sorry. Fine. Right. No big deal. All right. Let's label these angles. So here's angle A, B, C. And here's angle D, E, F. Okay, and let's measure the two angles to see if they're congruent. So I'll click on the angle tool. Notice it says choose a point on one leg. I'll choose A. Then it says choose a point at the vertex. I'll choose B. And then the third point is C. That's a 56-degree angle. Now, angle DEF looks smaller, right? So let's see how it is. So D, E, and then F. It is small, 44 degrees. So let's make them both 50 degrees, okay? So for 56 degrees to become 50 degrees, I have to make it smaller. So notice, by moving A closer to B, that doesn't help make it smaller. But notice, if I rotate A closer to C, now it becomes smaller. Again, an angle is about how much it's open. So there's 50 degrees. So here, for DEF to become 50 degrees, if I take D and slide it away from E, it's not making it bigger. It's not. But if I take D and rotate it away from F, now it's getting bigger. And there I go. There's my two 50-degree angles. Okay? So there's congruent angles. And now let's talk about our last slide of the lesson, the angle addition postulate. So the angle addition postulate is very similar to the segment addition postulate. So it says if point B is in the interior of angle AOC. So we have angle AOC, this obtuse angle, point B right here. Notice they constructed a ray, OB, and now you created two smaller angles. These two smaller angles, the yellow angle and the blue angle, they don't overlap. They're what we call adjacent to each other. We'll do that in the next lesson. So because they don't overlap, if you add the measure of angle AOB to the measure of angle BOC, you should get the measure of angle AOC. That's exactly what this says. That should make sense to you, right? It should make sense. Okay. Now, we can also use subtraction to do this, right? So if I use subtraction, just like the segment addition postulate. So say I wanted to find the measure of the yellow angle, the measure of angle AOB. Well, that would be equal to the largest angle, angle AOC, the big obtuse angle, minus this smaller blue angle, angle BOC. So if I take AOC, the big angle, and I subtract the blue angle BOC, that leaves me with the yellow angle, the measure of angle AOB. All right. Notice in this picture as well, the emphasis on three letters, right? All of these angles, these three angles, have O as their vertex. Look at their names. O is in the middle. If I were to just say angle O, which angle would I be talking about? You wouldn't know. So this is why learning to name an angle with three letters first, I think, is important. All right, so let's take a look at Desmos Geometry. Let's create an angle addition postulate situation. So Desmos Geometry, let me get a new construction here. All right, so I'm going to make a big angle with two rays. When I say big, I mean obtuse. Sorry. There we go. let's name it angle A, B, C. And let's go ahead and measure that angle. That's 148. And I don't know, like I want to be able to move it, but I don't think it can. That's a bummer. Okay. Anywho, so that's a 148-degree angle. So now I'm going to randomly put a point D somewhere in here. Let's put it right there, close to A. Let's call that point D. That's my point in the interior. Let's make a ray going from B to D. And now what I've done is I've created two angles, angle ABD and angle DBC. Let's measure those two angles. Angle ABD, 40 degrees, and angle DB. And before you click on C, if you're a predictor, you might know what DBC should be. Okay, and we got 190 degrees. Now, let's go ahead and add 40 and 109 in the graphing calculator. So 40 plus 109, and I got 148. You might have been able to do that in your head. That's fine. So 149. So getting 149, again, with Desmos geometry, that's very close. That's very close. If I hide this measurement right to 148, I can actually make this work out right if you want me to. Again, it's just kind of touchy. Let's see now. How'd I do? I don't know. Okay, so pretty close to 148. Now, if you want to, you can also move this angle in here to get different angle measures. So here, there's 80 and 68. So I haven't moved the big angle. I just moved this middle point to create two smaller acute angles inside. But now watch, 80 plus 68. There's your 148. So notice that these two angles always add up to the bigger angle. And that's angle addition postulate. All right, so the next video is going to have a couple problems from your Delta Math assignment to help you with your homework.